And I find out that the mortality rate of women with severed ectopic pregnancies was very high. So the probability of her dying was very good. I couldn't believe that I was one of the people on Earth that was going to have to go through that. As the plane is descending, I get a text from him that says something to the tune of like, I just talked to the doctor, brace yourself.
Welcome back to another episode of the Austin Zaback Show. Today, we've got a guy by the name of Tyler Hall on the show. I've known Tyler for a really long time, and we're actually about to get into a bunch of stuff that I don't even think I know about Tyler. I know that you've done some really cool stuff. I want to say you started a company in the transportation industry, VC-backed company. You ended up getting acquired, I believe, which is really cool. Congratulations, by the way.
Thanks, man.
And I don't think you were even working on that the last time that we hung out. Maybe you were.
Very early.
Very early. Yeah. So anyways, you've done a bunch of cool stuff, dude. And we were just talking before the show that you're getting into podcasting, and now we're talking about, like having a studio and like renting out the studio and just doing a bunch of cool stuff. But I'm excited to kind of dive into, I feel like the automobile deal that you did, Drivably?
Yeah.
Okay. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, Drivably was...
And I appreciate you being on the show, by the way.
You got it.
It's my second show today, so I'm like a little tired. Yeah, it's an honor. I appreciate that,
Not
man.
tired. You don't get tired.
I know. Yeah. I got to change change the way I think about it, right? Yeah.
Let's talk about Drivably. Drivably was a roller coaster. It's actually... The title of the podcast that I launched is called The Roller Coaster, and it's because I've found that every founder that starts a company that ultimately gets acquired, it wasn't without an insane amount of ups and downs.
It's not linear, is what you're saying.
It's not at all, and I think it applies across every industry, right? But specifically in startup land, which is where I operate, it's that way. So so Drivably was basically an idea that I had in college. So it dates back not that long, but about 11 years ago. And I paid for college. I was in Salt Lake City, Utah by flipping cars. And so I saved up enough money. Eventually I bought my first car. I realized I got a great deal on that car, so I listed it on our local classifieds. I sold it, and I made $1,000. And $1,000 at this time, Austin, was like real money. It was a lot of money, right? And so as a full-time student, full-time job, sold this car, still needed a car, went out, bought another car. I'm at work the next day. I list it. I make $2,000. Okay. So now I was onto something. I was smart. And so over the next 90 days, I'd bought and sold about 20 cars. And I walk into the DMV one day, and this lady's like, "Hey, Tyler, good to see you again." Right? She we're now on a first name basis. She's seeing me every day. And she's like, "Do you have a dealer license that you want to put on file with us?" Yeah. I'm like, "No." Like, do you have a wholesale license? Are you a broker? No, lady, I have no idea what you're talking about. Totally over my head. She goes, well, according to my records, you've bought and sold about 20 cars, and in the state of Utah, you can only legally buy and sell 3. And so I'm caught like a deer in the headlights, like, oh no, what do I do? Do I need to pay a fine, right? Yeah. At this point, I'm balling. I have all this cash.
Right, yeah.
I'm like, I'll just pay this lady off. It'll be fine. She's like, no, this is actually a Class B misdemeanor. I'm supposed to report you to the police, and you'll actually go to jail for this. And I'm like, whoa, right? So here I am thinking I'm slick, buying and selling cars. Come to find it was totally illegal. And so here I am at the DMV getting bullied by an old lady. I actually physically start crying because I'm still like a kid, right? I'm 21 years old. And so anyways, the long and the short is get a slap on the hand. She says, if you want to keep doing this, you have to have a dealer license. So I figured out a loophole, which was if I had a dealer that would let me use his license, I could keep flipping cars. But now I had to charge sales tax. So over the next 2 years, finishing school, I bought and sold over 200 cars.
Wow.
And I learned a lot about the auto space. I learned a lot about how to acquire vehicles from consumers. I ended up becoming an investor in a car dealership at that point. Basically, I lent him a line of credit for my own money. He would use it to buy cars, and then when he sold them, he would pay me interest on my money. So I was involved in that for about 3 years, and I learned a ton about the automotive space and some of the inefficiencies. So the short story is spent the next 7 at 2 early-stage tech companies learning how to build enterprise SaaS,
Yeah.
a software business, learning how to raise capital, learning how to build product, learning how to hire people, and do all the hard things. And the time that you and I met, 2018, literally maybe a month before you and I met for the first time, was when I left the second company to start Auto Hall, which was our car dealership that we also met at one point.
Yep.
And Auto Hall was where we incubated Drivably. So we can get into kind of the Drivably story, but that's the origin of why it started.
Very cool. Yeah. So then I guess the question becomes like, what is Drivably? And then like, what problem did it solve that you, like, why did you create it? You know, obviously I would imagine a guy like you know, really any entrepreneur, typically you start a company to solve a problem, to solve a need in the marketplace, right? It's like, hey, if I can solve somebody's problem, then I'm onto something. And then if I can solve 1,000 people's problems, or 100,000, or 1,000,000, right, or 1,000,000,000, then that really is the scale in which I can, you know, succeed and make money, and how much value I bring to the marketplace, right? So, what was the problem?
It's a great question. The thing that I knew before understanding all the problems was the size of the automotive market, right? So the first thing that drew me in was the automotive space is last year 1.2 trillion a year in revenue. Okay, it's the largest retail sector in North America by a lot.
Wow.
There's not even a close second. And so that was obviously attractive to me, was there's so much money exchanging hands every single year. So I thought if I can even solve a small problem, it could potentially be a big outcome, right? So when we started Auto Hall, our car dealership, I used it as an incubator, right? So I think the first like interesting point of my story for other entrepreneurs that are listening, or people who want to start a company, is instead of just going and building tech right away, we built a dealership.
Yep.
We became our customer first. I learned intimately what it was like to operate a dealership, to buy the cars, to open the doors, to sweep the floors, to detail the cars, to take pictures, all and everything in between. And because I had that knowledge of being my customer, I could actually build a product that was relevant for me, right? So instead of relying on Austin Zaback, car dealer, and asking you for feedback, I just did it myself, right? So that was like sort of an expensive R&D project, building a dealership, right? So we launched Auto Hall in January of 2018. I basically said, let's figure out all of the problems that car dealers have by being a car dealer. I created a list of like 30 things that we could have solved, right? Automotive, it happens to be a bit unfair, kind of like real estate was a few years ago, because they're so behind. They're so behind on their use of technology. They're very archaic in their processes. A lot of paper and pen still.
Similar to real estate, though, yeah.
Very similar, right? So I saw that as like, okay, there's a ton of things that we can solve here. And so we created this list. We started testing different products. We started narrowing it down. Eventually, I had conviction on two things. The first one was, if we can allow car dealerships to understand how much money to pay for used car inventory to help them maximize their profit margin, then we believe that our thesis was we believe dealers will pay for that, right? So we built a pricing engine, piece of technology, that scanned tons of data across the internet. And when a car dealer would put a VIN number into our solution, we would say, this is how much this car is worth retail in your market. Okay, so then they were informed, then they knew how much they could sell it for. So then they could say, okay, if I can buy that car for X and mark it up and sell it for what Drivably is telling me to sell it for, then I'm going to be profitable. I'm going to make money. So we started out as a pricing engine. And then eventually, back to my college days, I knew that if we could enable car dealerships to acquire consumer cars as a source of sustainable supply inventory, instead of going to the auctions and going to fleets like Enterprise and Avis and Hertz, then they would also pay for that. We believe that they would pay for that because consumer vehicles are cleaner, they're faster to recondition, they're typically more profitable, they're more unique than what you can buy at an auction. And so the second thing that we solved was we created a marketplace where Austin Zaback could go to our site, drivably.com. You could put in your VIN number. We'd make you an offer in 30 seconds because we knew how to price cars, right, based on our first piece of tech that we built. And then if you accepted that, if you said that offer looks good to me, you'd self-schedule an inspection. We'd come right to your house, inspect your car. And then we already knew that there was dealers that would pay our price and more, right? So, and then we made a fee off the dealers.
Got it. And how did that differ at the time from like, let's just say like Kelley Blue Book? Like how did your pricing engine, right? Like, cause I mean, and I don't know enough about the automobile industry, but that's the first thing that comes to my mind. So I'm just curious.
Yeah, that's a good question. So Kelley Blue Book is owned by an organization called Cox Automotive. Cox Automotive is the largest automotive conglomerate in the world. They own Kelley Blue Book. They own Auto Trader, which is one of the largest online marketplaces to buy cars. And they own Manheim and several other entities. But Manheim's the largest auction in the world.
Got it.
Wholesale auction. Because of that, Kelley Blue Book is incredibly biased because they're trying to serve their other businesses by showing a certain price on a car. So it's incredibly flawed, the number that they use. Kelley Blue Book is also a sort of generalized data model. So they're looking at cars more on a national scale. So you have a 2015 Toyota Camry. It's worth $7,428 according to Kelley Blue Book nationally. Right.
Hey, real quick, I just want you to do me a huge favor. If you're enjoying the show and you're enjoying all the amazing guests that we've been having on lately, then do me a massive favor and smash the like button, drop a comment down below, and subscribe if you have not already. I would greatly appreciate it. It would mean the world to me, and we will be able to bring on a lot more big names if you help us out. Now let's get back to the show. It's taking the average, right, but it might be worth more in New York City than it is in Los Angeles or whatever.
100%. So that car's worth a different price in every city across the U.S.
Is it just due to supply and demand? Like if you had to, why is that? It's just, I guess, the terrain of the state, like what literally people need, I would imagine.
Yeah, so supply and demand is kind of the key underpinning to why a car is worth more money in different markets. Seasonality goes into play, things like that. So a good example is like smart dealers in Arizona. They'll acquire two-wheel drive trucks in Utah because Utah's not that far away. But in a snowy climate, the demand for two-wheel drive trucks is low. So if they can acquire two-wheel drive trucks in the winter when it's snowing, people are willing to sell the car a lot cheaper. Bring it to Arizona, people are willing to pay more money, right? So that's one example of sort of this arbitrage that exists in an infinite amount of times between different markets in the U.S.
Yeah, 50 different markets, or 50 different states, and then an infinite
and then every different route. Yeah.
Yep. Wow. So. It's interesting. I never thought of it that way.
So we built like sort of the predictive modeling to understand that same 2015 Camry, what it's worth in every market, right? So if you were a dealer in New York or a dealer in California, we'd show you a different price. This is how much you should pay. So
very fascinating. What's the other one? There's Kelley Blue Book. What's the one that dealers use? It's,
NADA?
Maybe that's it, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's the same concept, I'd imagine.
Same exact idea.
Yeah, yep. They have the wrong, or not wrong, but they're I think you explain it really good where it's just they're biased. It makes all the sense in the world, right? So then that becomes your pitch then now, right? When you're, as somebody who's building a company, you build this predictive pricing model in the beginning, right? And in order to sell that idea, to get people to use it, right? It's that becomes the pitch. It's, hey, this is way more accurate. We're not biased. Like, we don't care. We're just here to serve you.
That's right.
Right?
Yep.
And then people buy into that, and then the next thing you know, you're building the whole shebang. So walk me through like the evolution then of building that company. Like, what does that look like? At what point do you I mean, obviously there's a lot of trial and tribulation, right? And figuring all of that out and building both of the components to it, and then ultimately getting acquired, right?
Endless trial and tribulation. In fact, the main question I get asked today, based on what I'm focused on today, from either current startup founders or aspiring founders that want to start a company, is like, should I start a company? Okay?
Yeah.
Based on what I went through, the right response being like a serial entrepreneur, it's like all I've done is startups. would be to say yes, right? It would be to say, yeah, it's amazing, right? Here's all the reasons why. My response is very different. My response when somebody asks if I should start a company is absolutely not. Like, not even it depends, right? That would be an appropriate response too, but it's no, you shouldn't start a company. And usually the response back is like some confused look, like, wait a minute, where are you going with this, right? And for me, it's, do you want the list, right? I mean, it's endless. It's, the odds are stacked against you. Like 1% of companies that start from the ground up and raise venture capital ultimately get acquired. Less than 1, right? So the odds are stacked against you. Say goodbye to your relationships. Say goodbye to your money. You're going to be broke. You're going to have no time. If you have kids, right, or a spouse or a girlfriend or a boyfriend, I mean, say goodbye to that. It's incredibly challenging. The list goes on forever, right? The volatility, dealing with other humans and their emotions, and right. So it's incredibly hard. So my normal answer is don't do it for all these reasons. And if somebody looks me in the eye and says, I get that, and I'm okay with that, and I understand the risks and I understand the pain and this roller coaster you're talking about, but I'm still going to go do it. Those are the ones that generally will be successful. If you have any sort of like angst when I share that with you, my advice is to not do it. So,
yeah, because you have to want, you have to seek out hard situations, right? Like, it's like, you know, I've been listening. I consume a lot of information and content, but you know, like, it's like this concept that like life is hard, like choose your hard, right? And so I think it applies to like everything. Like this morning I went and like did the cold plunge, right? And it was like 33 degrees. I think the cold plunge was the same temperature as the air temperature, right? Which is extremely difficult, right? It would have been way easier to not do that, but I did it, right? And so because I seek out hard, that version of hard, right? So there's like look like David Goggins, they're like somebody that like their constant daily thing that they do is like hard situations. Like they want to be in a hard situation because like that the idea that like discipline makes you happy or like discipline is where you get your fulfillment. I think those are the people, right, that should be entrepreneurs. You know, the people that genuinely are fulfilled by comfort, right, which is unfortunately the vast majority, I think, of America or the world. Which is like, I guess, like the way that we're innately wired, maybe like comfortability, right? Like we seek to be in an environment where we're the temperature's perfect, right? Everything's perfect. Just it's like it all lines up. We're not in any pain of any sort, right? Yeah. Like we avoid pain at all costs, right? Like if you think about it, like we don't do things that put us in pain, right? Emotionally, physically, financially, right? Spiritually, whatever. So I think there's just two different types of human beings in the world, right? There's like the type of like, hey, I'm going to seek comfort for the rest of my life in every area, right? Comfort, stability, etc. Nothing wrong with that, right? Yeah. And then there's the people who are like, I'm going to consistently seek uncomfortability, and I'm going to seek instability, and I'm going to seek uncertainty, right? And like the unknown. Right, and then those are the people that you see that are like doing crazy stuff, like going in the cold plunge when it's 30 degrees outside, right? Or like trying to build a company, or hiring people, or failing miserably every day trying to do a film podcast when there's 10,000 podcasts in the world, right? Because it's like, for somebody like me or you, right? What else would you do? Like, what's the alternative? So I think to your point, right? Of like, hey, if they flip the script back on me, of like, oh, I'm going to do it anyways, and there is no like thinking about it, then you know you have that type of human being.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with that. And it's the other thing is typically they'll be like, okay, well tell me a real life scenario of some of these things you're talking about. And when I think about the roller coaster, okay, if you think about somebody's normal life, they're going to have ebbs and flows. Everybody does. Every human does this.
Yep.
Okay. But notice that like when I do this, it's at least like sort of making progress in a direction. With a startup, it's more like this. It looks like a heart rate monitor.
Yep.
Okay, so if one day represents this much time, a normal human might have one sort of high or one low. Okay, when you're building a company, you could have like several in the same day. You could wake up. I'll give you a real example, and I wrote this in my recent newsletter, which is I had a day that I journaled because I woke up that morning from an email from an investor who said, congratulations, we're going to invest in this round. Okay, when we didn't have that much capital in the bank, by the way.
Yep.
Huge win, super excited. The next email was from our biggest customer who was informing us that they were canceling.
Yep.
Okay, and then the next thing that happened, I'm going to forget some of these, but basically a key team member lost somebody in their family, left the company.
Yep.
Okay, so super high, followed by a low, followed by another low. The next thing that happened, we closed a really big partnership with a new customer. Okay, super high. And then the last thing that happened that day was that same investor from that morning was like, actually, we're not coming in to the round. We're not investing, right? Yeah. So like this all happened in like 7 hours of time, right? So if you can't sort of understand that that's a real day in the life of an entrepreneur and just go, I get it. And I'm willing to hop on that roller coaster and get nauseated and feel sick and get whiplashed around, and I'm going to be okay with it. You shouldn't do a company.
Right.
Shouldn't be a founder.
Did you personally enjoy that? Like, that day that you described, like, walk me through, like, your state of being on a day like that? Because I find it fascinating, right? Like, for me, it sounds like you just described, like, today for me, right? Yeah. And honestly, I love it.
What's happened today?
To it. Well, I can't even go into too much detail because the people I would be talking, no, I mean, I think like a lot of that, right? Every day, right? Yeah. I just literally got out of a meeting with somebody who basically said like, hey, we're, like, I don't like the role that I'm in, right? Like in a nutshell, right? Like if I don't move roles eventually, and I don't want to say too much right now because I don't want this episode to air too soon and people listen to it, but and that was like a really valuable role, right, of human beings. So like we had to, within like 10 minutes, right, I walk out of a pod, I'm like eating lunch, right, doing my thing, and then it's like, hey, we've got to cancel that meeting, we're actually going to do this meeting instead, it's way more important, we got to retain this guy, by the way, we got to like completely basically plan our next business, the next thing that we're starting, because that ultimately is how you retain him, right? Because if we give him a piece of that, then that really is what we think he wants, and then we can keep him in that way. But that means we have to basically come up with we have to create the comp plan in 10 minutes, right? And come up with that's just like an example, right? To your question of like, but so my question to you though is like, I know how I feel on a day like today, right? So like, and I'm curious if it's true with entrepreneurs in general, like real entrepreneurs, because there's somebody listening right now who like they get excited. Like, I think you're talking to the people who are like, it's not for you, right? But I think there's somebody watching who gets excited about what you're describing. And they want to know, like, what you're thinking about, right?
Yeah, entrepreneurs are kind of sick. Seriously. Like there's some screws loose or something in our heads. Because I would say the first... Here's how I can describe it to relate it to a roller coaster, because that's kind of been our theme today. Is like, I was just at Disney with my kids, my 3 children. My son, who's 7, he's like all about every ride. He loves it, right? He loves the roller coasters.
If you've ever wanted to get into wholesaling real estate and you want to learn how to flip contracts and wholesale, right? Maybe you're brand new, maybe you've never wholesaled a deal, or maybe you're even doing a couple of deals a month right now, but you want to learn how to do more. Instead of joining my coaching program or somebody else's coaching program, we're actually looking to hire. So go ahead and message me 480-418-5339 and send me a text message opportunity. Okay, so if you want to work with me, you want to work with my incredible team, you want all of our leads, you want all of our systems, all of our processes, everything, right? And I've done about 2,000 wholesale deals in my career, then go ahead, shoot me a text, 480-418-5339, and message me opportunity. And look, especially if you're in my state, okay, the state of Arizona. If you live in Arizona and you want to get into wholesaling, this especially is an opportunity for you, because you can come sit right in this office with my entire team and be a part of one of the biggest wholesaling companies in the country. I look forward to talking to you.
Imagine getting on, a good example is like Space Mountain. Okay, the first time you do Space Mountain at Disney, if you've never done it, it's a pitch black ride. You can't see anything. You have no idea what's coming. And it's like, holy, whoa, like it's just crazy, right? Then you do it again. It's still pitch black, but you start to like know where it's going to go.
Yep.
And you do it a third time and you're like, okay, I'm figuring this out. And then the lights come on and you can actually see, oh, this thing's about to go right. I'm going to brace myself.
Yep.
Right? And so this is like, the roller coaster doesn't change. The only thing that changes is the repetition of times that we go through the roller coaster. And we have these days, right? So like the first year of building Drivably, like it would make me sick.
Yep.
I would get to the end of the day, I'd be depressed. I'd be down in the dumps. I would cry. I would call people for help. I mean, just all of the stuff. It was horrible. But eventually when you do it enough and you have enough repetition, you just go, oh yeah, I've seen this, I've done it. And you're able to sort of, because of that experience, flatten the curve of the roller coaster, if you will.
So do you become numb to it, or do you have the same level of like empathy for like the company and yourself and your employees and your team and the world as time goes along? Like, or do you become and you're just better at handling it, or do some entrepreneurs just become numb to the pain?
That seems like a lose-lose proposition. The answer, I think the answer for me is I hope that the empathy doesn't go away. I hope the amount that I care about the individuals who are impacted, or the company that's impacted, or the investor that's going to be impacted, I hope that remains the same. I think it does, right? But the way that we react and deal with it changes, right? And eventually you do get a little bit numb. You just go, so I think one reason why in the beginning of doing a company, before you've built up the repetition, is pretty much all of those like sick feelings that we feel are based in fear, right? It's like, okay, I'm going to have to let this person go. It's making me sick. I'm fearful that if I let them go, they're going to come back and sue me, and they're going to tarnish my reputation online, and they're going to this and that and the other thing. The reality is, generally, those fears are not real. Usually when you look the fear in the eye and you just do the thing, the outcome is not what the fear was telling you it was going to be. It's exactly the opposite. They don't tarnish my name. They're not, suing me, right? And things tend to be good. And actually, they tend to work out better for the employee, right? In the long run, they find something else that they're more passionate about, that they're excelling at. And so I think I related a lot to that, which is like, we just build up these fears, and once you're able to deal with fear and just say, it's just there, and I'm sensing that, and I see that it's fear trying to give me bad advice to do the wrong thing, and you just press through and stare it in the face and make the decision anyways, and then typically you come out on the other side okay.
I agree. Yeah. I think that you just get good at dealing with all that, right? Like, and fear doesn't bother you as much, in the things that you do the majority of the time, right? So like for me, like whatever I'm faced with the majority of the time that would have made me fearful many years ago, like no longer, I'm just like, it's just another day, right? And the things that you're still fearful of, you can very clearly see that I just haven't had enough repetition.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so then but then now I'm able to predict the future of that, if assuming I continue to rep it out, right? Like it's like, okay, that one thing, like it still bothers me or I'm still fearful of. So if I just rep it out, like in due time, it'll be just like everything else I've overcome, which is like, it doesn't even bother me,
100%.
So I totally agree. Then you build Drivably. Talk to me about like the acquisition and like how that kind of unfolds. There's a lot of different ways that you can get acquired, and I don't know how much you can talk about it, or like, what that looked like for you. I know sometimes when you get acquired, you're not allowed to say much, so say what you can, obviously.
Yeah, there's I want you to re-ask that question because I want to close the loop on one thing about fear,
Sure.
if that's okay.
Yeah.
There's and I heard this metaphor recently, and I'm curious if you've heard it because it actually went fairly viral on a friend's podcast about the buffaloes and the cows. Have you heard this metaphor?
I haven't.
Okay, so the metaphor of the buffaloes and the cows is when the storm is coming, when they see them off in the distance, the cows, they look at the storm or they sense it's coming, they turn around and they start running away from the storm in the direction that it's traveling towards them. The buffalo sense that the storm is coming and they run towards the storm. All right, so when you're dealing with bad things or you're dealing with trauma or pain or challenges, some of the things we're talking about, as the storm catches up and the cows are running away from it, they actually just start running in the storm. And so they stay in the storm for a lot longer. Whereas the buffalo, when they charge head on, they face the fear, they go do the thing, they deal with the trauma, they deal with the pain, they get through the storm a lot faster. So I loved that. I heard that recently on a friend's podcast, and it was super impactful to me. It was a great way to think about these two types of people that we're talking about.
It's very interesting. No, I think that it's a good analogy. Yeah, to think about everything that we just talked about. So I love it. To the question then, moving on to the acquisition, right? Like what does that look like? You get through the sleepless nights, you get through all the crap we're talking about, right? And then you get acquired. Your phone rings. Like walk me through like how it plays out.
Yeah, it was sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. I'll say that, right? And I'll be the first to admit that Drivably should not have been acquired as soon as it did. We started the company January of 2019. We were acquired October of 2021. So what's the math on
18 months?
A little more.
20?
It's 2 years and change, 2.5 years.
Okay, got it.
Right? Whatever that math is, 30 months.
Okay.
30 months. So, but it should have taken us probably minimum 7 years, maybe more like 10 years. But what happened was we launched the company. We raised about $3 million of venture capital funding.
Okay.
We have a ton of momentum. VCs are hot on us. It's early in 2019. Capital markets are frothy at this point, pre-COVID. We take that capital. We hire an engineering team in-house. We start building a product. We do all the wrong things you can do in the first year of a company. We did them, literally. Basically run out of money by the end of that year, blow through the initial tranche of capital, fire our entire engineering team at the end of that year, start over from scratch. The whole product. We didn't use any of it. Okay? So think of how that feels telling your investors, like, hey, thanks for the money, it's all gone, and we haven't made any progress. We have no customers.
Yep.
Right? We, on our second go-round, they believe in us. A little more money comes in. We're a lot more efficient. We've learned a lot of hard lessons. We take a product to market, starts working. Then COVID happens. And at the beginning of COVID, by the way, COVID happens when we're supposed to be raising our next round of funding. Okay, so we already don't have that much cash in the bank. There was a company at that point looking to acquire us in sort of an acqui-hire, meaning we want to buy your team for pennies on the dollar. And because we were out of money, we were like, maybe that's what we're going to have to do. So we were exploring that. That deal should have happened. Then COVID happened. That deal fell apart. And so through a miracle, we had an investor come in, very grateful for, which is Porsche. So we were the first company based in North America that Porsche has ever invested in. And that gave us enough breathing room to at least weather the COVID storm. Because when COVID happened, we went from growing to just dead drop. All of our customers canceled basically in a period of about a week. They were being shut down. There was all these mandates. And it wasn't clear how long that was going to last. And so that was the darkest time for me as a founder at Drivably, because we had started to make really good progress. I was super bullish on the future. We were going to have an exit. It wasn't going to be that great, but it was going to be an exit. That falls off the table. All of our dealers start canceling. I've got 150 grand a month of payroll, and I have 100 grand in the bank. Okay, do that math. That doesn't work, right?
21 days. You have more month at the end of the money, right?
We're out.
Yeah.
We're basically out of money. So really dark times for me, and I just thought, this can't be, a virus is not how we're gonna get killed. If we die, it's gonna be because like another company killed us. We just didn't execute well. It's not gonna be a virus. Had to let go the majority of my staff, 80% of our people. Incredibly hard. And secured the investment from Porsche, and then went and acquired a company based in Canada because they were struggling a bit as well. Merged the two companies in about 45 days, and then the market flipped completely, 180. Went from being like at an all-time low automotive to the next month, which was August of 2020, at almost an all-time high when it came to supply and demand. The amount of consumers that wanted to buy a car versus the available amount of vehicles for sale, we were in the middle of this perfect supply and demand storm. So we hit the market perfectly. Company starts growing sort of vertically at that point from like zero. And we have 14 months of straight upward growth. And at that point, we had to decide if we wanted to raise a Series A, which would have been our next financing. We had appetite somewhere in the ballpark of 15 to 20 million on that round. And at the same time, I was tired. I was like, I had been through the ringer, and I didn't know if I had the energy, even if we went and raised the money, to keep building, right? And so at the same time, I called a couple of CEOs of companies that I was cordial with and or friends with and or partners with, and said, hey, we're either going to go raise money and compete with you in a big way, or you should look at acquiring the business. I called a few more friends, had 5 companies basically in a process looking to acquire us. Ultimately, that became 3. We had term sheets from 3 companies within 4 months of that initial call, which was, let's call it May of 2021. And by October, basically by June, we narrowed it down to 2, signed a term sheet with 1, went through about 90 days of due diligence, and then closed first week in October.
Wow.
So it was a lot, and it wasn't smooth. And by the way, the deal almost fell apart once we had signed the LOI. And again, we were out of money. And it, again, kind of a miracle that we ended up keeping it together. But it ended up being a great thing for us and for the parent company that we did. So
yeah, that's awesome. What was the process like of raising, VC money, going to VCs and raising capital, right? I know a lot of people that that's in their future, right?
Yeah.
Maybe even in my future potentially.
Yeah.
And so like what was that like? And what was the difficulty level of that in the beginning when you were going for your first round, let's just say, the first 3 million that you were going to raise? Like what was that like? Yeah,
raising venture capital is not, it's not easy, right? And you listen to like some of the best companies ever. Brian Chesky, founder and CEO of Airbnb, right? One of the biggest tech valuations of the last decade. This guy pitched like over 1,000 VCs. Just think of the amount of time it takes to have 1,000 conversations.
Right.
Before he got like his first real yes, right? So for me, we had a half-baked version of a wireframe when I went to raise money. Like, we did not have a product. I had a bit of a competitive advantage because my brother was a VC in San Francisco. And so he tapped me into a lot of his friends that were venture capitalists. I went and pitched every Arizona-based VC and quickly realized that they're playing a different game in Silicon Valley. And so I flew out to San Francisco. I was in San Francisco 5 days. I averaged 6 pitches a day. So I did 30 pitches in 5 days. And on the last day, and all of them were no, and I had pitched 20 to 25 before that, right? So I've done over 50 pitches at this point. On the last day, I sit down with a guy named Dan Rumanek, and shout out Dan. And he's like, it was basically the most uncomfortable pitch that I ever did in all the fundraising that we did at Drivably. He was hammering me, he was questioning me, he was doubting me, he was challenging everything. I was literally sweating, and he could see me sweating from my brow and was like, dude, are you good? And I was like, I'm super uncomfortable right now, right?
Yeah.
Like, it was really tough. And I'm thinking I bombed this pitch.
Yeah.
We're in a WeWork, we're sitting across from each other like this, which was not normal for a pitch. And he's like, I love it. I think it's amazing. I'm going to talk to my GP like right after our meeting and see what he thinks, and I'll get back with you, right? So I had heard that a few times before, and it never panned out to be anything. Well, I'm in my next pitch. It's the last one of the day before I go home the next morning. And I get a text from him, and he's like, can you come back to the WeWork right now? So literally, I'm in the middle of pitching another VC, and I'm like, hey, I'm so sorry. Somebody else wants to meet, and they're warm. Like, do you mind? And I was like, no, go do your thing, right? So I stand up, I leave that meeting, I go back to the WeWork. I sit down in an office with Dan and Ulas, and I do my spiel. It's 15 minutes. This is the difference between seasoned professional Silicon Valley investors and, we'll just say, other investors. I don't want to pick on Arizona. 15 minutes, he says, sounds like an amazing business. You seem like the right guy to do it. How does $750,000 sound? And at the time, I was only raising 1.5, so it was going to be half the round. He says, we'll lead. Here's what the terms will be. I'll get you paperwork tonight. We'll wire funds tomorrow. Right? So, oh, and by the way, at this point, I had only raised $500K. So I had raised $500K of angel money before I did institutional round, that next round. I had like 60 grand in the bank, and we were burning 100. So same thing. I was out of money.
Right.
Like, if we didn't get that, we were done.
Yep.
Early on. So luckily, I shook his hand. He looked me in the eye. We did the deal. Next morning, get funded. But and then from there, once we got the first yes, the next like 4 were a piece of cake, because a lot of investors invest based on signals from other investors. One of the best like forms of validation or signals is if other investors will put money into the deal. So
Sure.
Once we got that first check, I circled back with all the others, said, hey, we've got a lead investor, $750K. We've still got $1 million or $1.5 million left in the round. Who else wants to come in? And we closed the round that way.
And you fill it up pretty quick that way, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think we actually ended up letting some other investors come in later that year. So part of that initial $3 million came in much later because they were like sort of strategic or value add investors. But
Yeah.
the majority of that round got done pretty quick. Yeah.
So you go from Arizona to Silicon Valley, and then you got 30 pitches in 5 days. Like, how did you line those up? Like, what did that practically look like, right? 'Cause for somebody watching or listening right now, they have no idea how to even set up a pitch to get in front of VCs, right? And to pitch their thing, and maybe they have something good. Maybe somebody's watching right now, they got a good thing, but they can't figure out a way to get the meeting. Do you have any tips for that person?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I'm probably not the best guy to ask this because I had an in. Right?
Yep.
My brother was my in to crack into venture capital,
And maybe everybody just needs an in. I believe everybody, I mean, through the law of association, right? We all technically have an in.
Yeah.
It just might not be the first degree. It might be the second. It's probably the second or third degree of like, hey, I know a guy who knows a guy.
For sure. I would say like this is the same for people that are trying to land their next dream job or trying to raise venture capital, which is the probability of your deal getting funded is exponentially higher to a magnitude of like 10 if you are introduced to the fund. Same with a company. The probability of you getting hired is exponentially higher to a magnitude of 10 if you were introduced to the hiring manager or the company by somebody they trust.
Yeah, referral, yeah.
Right? Like, who gets hired cold anymore from applying online? It just doesn't happen, right? It's the same with venture capital. Like, it's very rare that a company can cold email a VC and them just be like, sure, I'll take the meeting. And then they do the meeting and they're like, yeah, you seem like a good person, we'll invest, right? Like they need data points, and one of the best ones is validation from somebody they trust.
Yeah.
So I'd say for like any entrepreneur that's looking to raise capital, there's quite a process. Like first, build an amazing pitch deck and be able to tell an amazing story.
Yep, you got to be a phenomenal storyteller.
You have to be. I
and
mean,
it's short, and you got to tell it pretty quick too, right? It's like I mean, in the relative to the grand scheme of time, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, most VCs, right? Like if they're not hooked within 5 minutes, like it's a no.
Yep.
Right. So how do I tell the right story about this thing that I'm building, this problem I'm solving, to get the VC interested at all? How do I tell that story before I even get the call in a pitch deck? Right. So creating the pitch deck, then learning how to tell it live. Then looking at my network and saying, who do I know that knows venture capitalists, right? Who do I know? Who's started a company and raised VC money? Maybe I'll start there. They probably talk to 50 investors. Who can they introduce me to? Who else do I know? Do I know anybody that's doing VC that can introduce me to their network, right? So thinking through that. And then, like you're not going to, no amount of practice with like peers is going to prepare you for actually pitching VCs. So in my experience, like I had to do the 30 to 40 to 50 and like listen to what they were saying and then like go back and tweak and refine and figure it out and figure out how to tell the story that would ultimately resonate. Then by that 55th time, we finally got our first yes, right?
Yeah, which is such an incredible story, yeah. And I think it's what anybody has to do with anything, right? But I think in particular, obviously, we're talking about going and raising capital. So really cool story to tell. So the going the Series A, and what do you think that would have been like? And going and raising the next round of 15, 20 million and playing that game. I mean, obviously you didn't go that route, but
yeah, it's I'm happy we didn't because the market changed drastically.
It did, yeah. It went in what month? Like mid 2022, June. Is that when the automobile market turned too?
No, it was probably
sooner.
Which direction? The downtrend?
Yeah, I guess I'm referring to the downtrend. I don't know which one you're referring to.
Well, it turned up like in the middle of COVID.
Sure.
Right? So it went straight down, then it went straight up like we talked about. And then it turned back down probably January of 22.
Okay.
January, February.
So sooner, yeah.
So about a year ago. And that's when like the world started to change, right? Like the macro started to change. Investor sentiment started to change. 2022 was one of the I think, hardest years for companies that were looking to raise venture capital ever. I'm close to a lot of venture funds. Many of them didn't write a check, period, for the last 6 months of 2022. Right? So things got a bit bleak there for a while.
Yeah. Which is interesting, right? Because I think investors, a lot of times too, they get a feeling even before there's actually any evidence of things changing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like it's a gut thing, I think, to a degree in the beginning. And then obviously it changed. Like there's data and the news, everybody's talking about it and things actually change. But when you see a lot of times, like it's just like, hey, I predict, like I think this is what's going to happen, right?
Yeah.
So it's an interesting thing. So talk to me, what are you doing now? Like what's you're doing podcasting? I mean, what do? You get acquired and then what? You go, I mean, like, you go build another one eventually or what?
Yeah. Are you sure you're ready for this?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So let me tell you a story. We're catching up real time, which is fun.
Yep.
On the podcast. So we get acquired October 21. Any sort of tech acquisition, the integration of the two companies tends to be pretty tricky. Mm-hmm. I'll just say it that way.
Yep.
Okay. Things don't go as smoothly as you ever expect them to, right? But we're really happy with the parent company. We were thrilled to end up there. The deal was great, very favorable. So here I am, 30 years old at this time that we're acquired, and really like feeling untouchable, right? Like I just like fought the war, and I came out and I prevailed. We won, right? We did it. And I get invited to go out to NASDAQ on Wall Street, and it's the CEO of the parent company and a couple of the executive team. And we're doing a presentation on Wall Street about the company and the recent acquisition of Drivably and other things. And I wake up on March 1st, and I'm in New York City, and I wake up to a call from my mother-in-law. And immediately my stomach dropped. I never talk to my mother-in-law on the phone. It's not a thing that we do, let alone when I'm in New York City, let alone at 5 a.m. Arizona time, okay? The only thing I'm thinking is what happened to one of my kids, right? And I answer the phone and I say, hey, Renee, what happened? And she says, Brooklyn, who's my wife, has been rushed to the hospital in an ambulance, and we're not sure what's going on. And I said, any idea how bad it is? She said, it's bad enough that you should come home right away. So I'm in New York City. I text my assistant. I say, I need you to get me home as fast as possible. She's like, well, what about the thing? What about the, are you not? And I'm like, I don't know what's going on. Something happened to my wife. So if you've ever been to New York City, which I know you have, getting out of
on Wall Street. Yep.
Getting out of the city is a nightmare, and it's in the morning, and so I'm sitting in an Uber, and I'm getting these text updates from my father-in-law, who followed the ambulance, and was the only one that was allowed to go into the hospital because of COVID restrictions. Mm. And generally, when really bad things happen in your life, you expect that immediately they're going to get better. You expect that there's going to be this like natural uphill trajectory. And this wasn't the case this time. This time it was the opposite. Every text update I got was worse. Mm-hmm. And so the first one was, we arrived to the hospital, she's unconscious. And I still had no idea what happened at all. The next one is, we're in triage. Looks like she's going to have surgery. And then I'm standing in the airport I'm standing next to an ATM in the airport. And I get a text from him, and it's a picture of the whiteboard that the doctor wrote on what the diagnosis was. And my wife was pregnant with our fourth, and it said, severed ectopic pregnancy. Like, I have no idea what that is. I go to Google, I research it, and I find out that the mortality rate of women with severed ectopic pregnancies was very high. And so the probability of her dying was very good. And I couldn't believe that I was one of the people on earth that was going to have to go through that, right? So I get on the plane. The next update is she's in for surgery. The next update is she's still not out. She's still not out. She's still not out. Now, we've delivered 3 kids. You know how long the doctor's in the delivery room for a labor? Generally like 10 minutes. Mm-hmm. It's like very quick. So the fact that she was in surgery for 3 hours was extremely concerning to me. And as the plane is descending, I get a text from him that says something to the tune of like, I just talked to the doctor, brace yourself. And that was hard. So I'm just thinking, okay, well, God, like, what do I do now? You know, like, I can't support these kids the same way that she can, right? And I thought to myself, I just thought, like, I had this weird sense of peace, which was God knows that I can't support these kids and raise these kids the way that my wife can. And so she's just going to live. Like, it's just going to work out, right? And I touch down on the ground. I'm running through the airport. I'm calling an Uber. I get in the car. I'm like, please drive as fast as you can. And the Uber driver's like, okay, like, what's going on? And I'm like, just go, right? And I remember, like, every second that went by felt like an eternity, right? Because I knew that she was still holding on. I got a text that she was out of surgery and still, like, basically still had a heartbeat. And so I just wanted to be there for, like, I wanted to be there to say goodbye, you know? So we finally get to the hospital. It's still COVID restrictions. I walk into the emergency room area, and the person's like, hey, we're closing right now. And it looks like your guest already has somebody. And I literally just, like, ran past the thing. I'm like, I don't care. I didn't have a mask on. And I got up there and when I walked in the room, she was just laying in the bed, and my father-in-law was there. And when she heard me speak, it was the first time that she had made any sort of movement, and she kind of lost control of her emotion, sort of subconsciously. And we didn't know what was going on. We had to call the doctor in because it was kind of scary. And later she said, like, when I heard your voice, it caused, like, a reaction to fight. Sorry. So, I haven't really shared this publicly, so it's difficult. But yeah, the the silver lining to this whole story is she fought like hell. We're in the hospital about 5 days, and eventually she gained enough strength, and her blood levels were consistent enough that she was able to leave the hospital. And eventually we got home, and then there was constant care in the house for about 30 days. And today she's healthy as can be. So, but that experience, like, I think that story is relevant because it changed the way that I view life totally. Mm-hmm. Like, I think I'll forever describe my life as the 31 years before my wife almost died, and then everything after, because everything I lived and breathed was my company. Mm-hmm. I wasn't a great father. I wasn't a great husband. My relationships were not that deep with my wife. Like, we were fine, but they weren't deep. I didn't really have purpose in life. I wasn't feeling very fulfilled. And this thing forced me to really think about how I spent my time and how I prioritized my life. And so I'll sort of pause there, and we can get into what I'm working on now and how I went through a lot of deep reflection to eventually do what I'm doing today.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you telling the story live. What would you say, like, the thing is that you learned, or like the action, or like the thing that you got from that like you think other people need to know, so they don't have to go through that, but they can take whatever that action is theoretically today. Like, if I were to take that action, or if somebody watching were to take that action, right? Like the thing that maybe you weren't doing, or the way that you weren't living your life, that now you do, that it took that to get there. Like, what would that be?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say really spend some time reflecting on your priorities. Understand that your company's never going to love you back. Mm-hmm. The amount of money you have really is not that important. It's really not. It's a resource to be able to make an impact on your life and other people's life, and that's it. The things that really matter, that you should convince yourself of and do some deep reflection around, is your relationships. Are they real? Are they deep? Whether or not you're present in your life. Sounds so cliche, sounds so simple. I was not present for 4 years at all. The only thing I was ever thinking about with my wife and my kids was my company and some fire that I was going to have to put out the next morning, right? I would say, like, don't wait until something traumatic happens to make the right changes in your life to live a more purpose-filled and fulfilled life. Like, that's the message.
Yeah. A very valuable message too, right? What percentage of entrepreneurs do you think fall into the category of, like, what you just described, which is like, hey, completely neglecting every other area of life, or at least like partially neglecting every other area of life? Obviously, there's no statistic,
99 point something. I mean, it's most of them. Yeah, I would say some probably do a better job to an extent, but like this idea, especially in like venture-backed startup culture, there's sort of an expectation that the only thing the founder should do is eat, drink, breathe, sleep their company. Mm-hmm. And it's bullshit. It's not the case. Like, I actually think that when founders have balance and they schedule time for themselves and they do things that they want to do and they take vacations and they take time off and they eat lunch, right? And they spend time, meaningful time with their family, and they unplug and they set their phone at the door when they walk in. And like, that's the only way, in my opinion. And I didn't do it that way. And most founders don't, but they should. Because when you have that, it creates this level of energy that when you're back in the office, you're more focused, you're more motivated, right? You're ready to get after it. Whereas when you don't and you never turn it off, that's when you get burnt out. And that's when things get really tough for founders and for companies. And so you have to take the time for yourself. You have to get your priorities straight and realize that like the thing that is most important in life is the relationships you have with those that you love.
Yeah, I agree. I think that you have to figure that out. I think it's a very difficult thing to figure out. And I don't think most people ever figure it out, right? I certainly don't have it figured out. And I talk to a lot of people on a daily basis that definitely don't have it figured out.
Oh, totally.
Right? Because in the moment when you're building, you think you have good intention, right? So I think that becomes the tricky thing, right?
Yeah.
Is like going back and looking at like in the moment, right? It's typically you're not doing things out of ill intent. The founders that you're talking about and the people that are doing what you're talking about they typically think that they're doing it for their family, right? Or they're doing it for their kids, or they're doing it for, and to a degree they are, and to a degree they're not, right? To a degree it's a false illusion of like, yeah, you're technically doing it for them, like somewhere in the future, but like, are you right now? Like, do they care right now?
Yeah.
Right? It's a weird balance. But I totally think that you're onto something, and I think that if people could get that now without having to go through what you went through, like that's really valuable.
Yeah.
Right? So I hope people get that message from watching the podcast. So
Thanks.
after having experienced that and going through that, like what has that now done? You know, how have you lived your life the last six or 12 months?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and then what are you doing now? I can't imagine you're somebody who's just completely idling either.
I'm not chilling, that's for sure. But I've never felt like I had the kind of balance that I have in my life now. So I spend a lot more time with my kids, spend a lot more time with my wife. We actually have meaningful conversations now, which is great. We're very open with each other, which is great. These seem like sort of table stakes things. They're just not, especially when you're building and you're busy and you're not focused on the right things. So this all happens in May. 2 months later, I call the CEO of our parent company and I say, hey, for all of the reasons you know, specifically to take care of my wife and the family and their health, and also to be honest with myself that I wasn't going to be happy staying at the parent company. I wasn't going to be fulfilled. I'm leaving the company. So I left the company early. That was incredibly difficult, obviously. I took some time to just think and reset and be present with the family. And then on the 4th of July every year, we go up to Jackson Hole, Wyoming, which if you haven't been, you got to go.
I've never been.
It's amazing. You got to take Mo. You guys got to go.
Yep.
We're up in Jackson Hole, and I decide that I'm gonna take the opportunity because we're in the mountains to do some deep reflection. So I jump in my parents' truck. They have a little Jeep Gladiator, and I take it up as high as the trail will go on the highest mountain near their house. Mm-hmm. And I get up there and I'm all alone. And I park it to where when I'm sitting in the bed of the truck, I'm overlooking all of Jackson Hole. It's amazing. And I thought, I'm going to get peace and serenity up here, and this is going to help me like work through some of my feelings, right? And so as I'm sitting up there, I literally ask the question to whatever you believe in. For me, it's God, but it could be the universe, right? I ask the question to God. Like, what do I do? How should I spend my time? And earlier that day, I was advising a couple of venture capital funds, and I had gotten close to one of the companies in one of our portfolios and ended up becoming an advisor to that company myself. And the CEO earlier that day said, "Hey, I'd love for you to coach me, be my CEO coach." And I had a CEO coach at Drivably, and it was life-changing. It was the 1 hour that I look forward to more than anything every week, was that call with him. And I said, "That's not me, but let me introduce you to somebody who does this, as a living." And he insisted and said, "No, I think it's you. Like, I feel very strongly that you should coach me."
If you're a real estate agent or a real estate wholesaler, then you know that lead generation is one of the most important aspects to any business. You know that you have to consistently generate leads on a weekly, monthly, and yearly basis. That way your team has people to call, and that way you're constantly getting new opportunities in your company. I actually partnered up with a company called Rocket Lead Services, and they have VAs that are outbound cold calling on your behalf every single day. In my experience, there's a lot of different ways that you can generate leads as an agent or as a wholesaler. You can do pay-per-click, you can drive for dollars, you can do text messaging, you can do Facebook ads, Instagram ads, and so much more. In my experience, I believe that cold calling is by far the #1 way to generate leads in 2022. Not only is it my favorite way, but it is the highest ROI from what I've ever found. So Rocket Lead Services is one of the best companies out there for doing just that. They have virtual assistants that get assigned to you and to you only that are constantly calling motivated sellers to generate leads for your business. Again, this is for anybody looking to generate seller leads for their business. This is for a solo real estate agent looking to do a couple of deals a month, all the way to teams that have over 100 agents and you're looking to generate more leads for your team. Wholesalers that are looking to generate more seller leads, all the way to wholesalers that are looking to do many, many deals per month. Go to www.rocketleadservices.com and go ahead and book your free consultation. Again, that is www.rocketleadservices.com and book your free consultation. Now, let's get back to the show.
And so I said, okay, let me think about this. I drive up in the mountains. I asked the question specifically, God, should I coach CEOs? Is that something I should do? Would I be good at that? And I kid you not, 4 or 5 seconds goes by. It's totally silent. And I hear behind me some wrestling in the woods. And I turn around and there's a moose, a mother moose, and her baby fawn. And they're staring at me, and I'm staring at them. This is like a 800-pound moose, right? And I'm like, I don't know if I should be freaked out or if I should be like, oh, this is amazing. This moose and her fawn walk right up to me. We get nose to nose, closer than you and I are right now. She kind of sniffs me, checks me out, walks over to the edge of the cliff. It's not like a sheer drop, but it's like a cliff. Strikes a pose. I take a bunch of photos, a bunch of videos, and the moose and her fawn are on their way. And I was like, if that's not an answer to a prayer, I don't know what is. I think God knew I wasn't great at listening, probably, and was like, hey, I'll just send you a direct sign, a moose.
Right.
And so I had this overwhelming feeling that okay, I'm going to coach the CEO. And I started doing it for 1 month and had some just incredibly meaningful and life-changing conversations in our coaching calls. And I thought, this is what fulfillment feels like. And so I started working on building a company around it, building a personal brand around it. And now I spend my days advising startup founders, coaching startup CEOs, doing some investing in early stage companies, advising a couple of venture capital funds. But all of my time today, even the podcast, it's all geared towards helping startup founders be successful and fight the fight and go on the roller coaster that I went on.
Yeah, and balance it all, right?
And balance it all.
Yeah.
Before it's too late.
Right. Yeah. Juggle it all. And so what would your advice be like in practically doing that, right? Like walking that out? Is it just like time blocking and just like managing the calendar better? I mean, like for these dudes that you're coaching and these dudes that you're helping, right, that are in your shoes like previously, right? Like, is it, hey, take Sundays off, Sunday's the Sabbath, like go to church, like don't, like what is it practically? I know some dudes that are like, I work from 9 to 5 every day, like that, but like there is something to be said too. I mean, I guess it depends on the industry and things of that nature where it's like, hey, like you got to be available at different times and what have you.
Yeah.
So like, do you have like practical advice for people, or is it more of like contextually, like everybody's different and I've got to tailor it to each individual?
Yeah, it's a bit of both. I mean, everybody is a little different. The main differences are people's life stage that I work with, right? So like if you're married with 4 kids, I'm going to probably share some different feedback than if you're single, for example, right?
Sure.
Just because there are different things you have to weigh and manage in those scenarios. But there is some good, I think, best practices. Things like time blocking, I think, work well. I think like scheduling time where you're totally unplugged every day, okay, whether that's for 30 minutes or 2 hours. I would say making sure that what's the right way to say this? Making sure you're doing things in your job that bring you energy. This is probably one of the main like foundational things in the coaching that I do with CEOs is most CEOs are tricked into believing that they just have to do everything, right? One thing I think you've actually figured out, and I'd love to get your feedback on this, Austin, is like, if it's not something that you love and that you're great at doing, i.e. doing the podcast, nobody can do this better than you can in your company, then you just don't do it, right? A lot of founders, but you've done it because you've figured that out and you have a ton of experience. A lot of founders, they think that, well, I don't know that anybody else can do this. I don't really like doing it. When I do it, it drains my energy, but I'm stuck. I have to do it, right? And I think the sooner that you can move away from doing things that drain your energy and focus your entire days on doing things that bring energy, that's like when the magic happens. And then if you can get the entire team focused on doing activities that bring them energy, which are different activities than you, it's a very magical, harmonious thing, right? So I would say time blocking, priorities, and then figuring out what you love that you're great at that brings you energy and focusing on doing those. And me as your coach, like holding you accountable to doing what you say you're going to do.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think you have to figure out how to delegate and that's the only way to scale. And you've got I failed a lot, right? And I think that's how I learned. Ultimately, I just figured out all the ways that don't work. Like Thomas Edison, it's like 900 ways that don't work,
Best way.
Getting closer to the one that does, So, and I don't have it all figured out by any means, but we do have an incredible team. We have about 70 people, I think, on our internal team, and then another 70 people virtually, or about 100 virtually, Amazing. I guess. But a lot of those people are contracted out to other people. But yeah, we're growing every day, and you have to figure out how to delegate. Like you said, like I'm not that great at a lot of things. Like I can do them, right? Like I could technically do everybody's role, but I'd be the first to admit I'm not the best at it, right?
Yeah.
Like at one point I did do everybody's role, know?
Yeah.
And that's, I think, how you scale as an entrepreneur. But I was talking to somebody earlier today, and I've talked to a lot of people over time on the pod and off the pod, where, founders struggle to delegate for whatever reason. And I think I've been there before. But I think a lot of it's just like letting go, right? And I think for a long time I struggled with that, like micromanaging, letting go. And I think now I enjoy that, You know, like it's actually like kind of cool to me now.
Yeah.
Where I'll like walk into a meeting or I'll walk into the office and like things will change. And like I didn't even know about it. And to me, I find that cool. Now it's like cool. I find it where like I think other people that gives them anxiety, right? It's like, oh my God, like did they do it right? Like did they do it the way I would have wanted it done? Like did they really make that decision the way I would have made that decision? And I think for me, it's just like I don't think about that anymore. It's just like, did they do the best they could in making the decision? Because I can't be there and here. So the question can't cross my mind of like, did they do it the way I would have done it? Because they're not me. Yeah. It's I chose to put them in that role because I believe they were the best suited for the job, right? So then did they make the decision the best way that they knew how?
Yep.
And then did I make the right decision by putting them in that role, right? And if those two answers are yes, then walk away.
I love that point. There's a Harvard white paper that was produced in 1999, stood the test of time. I think you were like, what?
4.
2 or 4.
Thanks for the compliment.
I was young too. I was 9 at this time, right? But it came out in 99. It's called Who's Got the Monkey? Have you heard of this? Mm-mm. So the idea of who's got the monkey in this white paper, it's actually the most downloaded Harvard business white paper ever.
Wow.
In history. So I recommend everybody go read it. But the idea is when you have a problem or something you're trying to solve, it's represented in this white paper as a monkey on your back. Okay? So let's say you have a subordinate, somebody that works for you that has a problem. They have a decision what they're going to do with that problem. How am I going to solve this monkey? How am I going to get this monkey off my back? Mm-hmm. Okay, so they're going to come into your office and they're going to say, Austin, I've got a problem. They just put the monkey in the middle of the table. They told you what the problem was, right? And now it's your decision as the manager what you do with the monkey.
Sure.
Do you take it and go, I got this? Or do you give it back to them, right? And enable them. Now, in this white paper, it talks about the 5 degrees of initiative, which the lowest degree is somebody who says, Austin, I've got a problem. I need you to solve it. I need you to give me an answer. Take my monkey.
Yeah.
That's horrible for an organization because you can't do that across 200 people. Mm-hmm. Doesn't scale. It doesn't work. The highest degree is somebody that comes in and says, Austin, I had a problem. I had a monkey on my back. I thought through it strategically. I made the decision. I took the action. I did the thing. And either it worked or it didn't work. Mm-hmm. Like, which one do you want?
Right. Second one all day long.
You want the highest degree of initiative. And then there's 3 in between that I won't spoil. I'll force everybody to go read it. But yeah, the whole idea is like great leaders are able to enable their team, make them feel like they have the authority to make decisions autonomously, and they give them the latitude to fail. They say, go fail. Go make the wrong choice because the next time you won't. Yep. Right? And I'm comfortable with that. I could give you the answer and we could get it right the first time, probably, in most cases. But I'd rather you go fail because the next 20 times you do it, you're going to do it right.
Yeah.
Right? So I love your leadership around that, and it reminded me of Who's Got the Monkey.
That. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, dude, I learned from guys probably just like you, I mean, like my whole life, all I did was study people, right? Like I just grew up and like, I just would read and study and I'm still studying. Like I'm studying now more than I've ever studied, right? Like I'm constantly like, oh my gosh, I got to figure out where do I go from here? Like what's the next level? Like I got to learn all kinds of stuff and I've got to scale, So I think everybody's just on their path.
Yeah.
And you just have to be getting better. You've got to be improving. I see a lot of people that don't improve, and that won't work, right? Like if you're not improving as a founder, or an entrepreneur, visionary leader, then you're not gonna make it. Yeah. Because you're just gonna continue to fail over and over and over again. You're not ever you have to learn. You have to get up and learn. That's the key, right? Totally. A lot of people don't.
Totally agree. Do you listen to Lex Friedman podcast ever?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've listened to a handful, probably 4 or 5 of his. Yep.
Did you listen to Mr. Beast?
I did.
Okay, so Mr. Beast had something on that podcast that was amazing. Lex asked him what some of his routines were. And he said, every day I try to go on a walk for 1 hour, around an hour. And he said, instead of just going for a walk, I go on the walk and then I call other creators and I just say, teach me something, right? Mr. Beast, by the way, is the #1 content creator by a landslide. Nobody's even close, right? I mean, sure, there's a couple by way of, but like he's running away with this thing, and he is still learning. He is still asking his friends who are other great creators for advice. And I thought, I'm actually starting a segment. It'll be out by the time this gets released, called Teach Me Something, where I randomly ask founders and entrepreneurs in under 1 minute to teach me something that they are a master at. And
Wow,
so,
I love that. Do you catch them on the fly, or do you give them prep?
Well, I gave them prep. The first several I did. I texted friends that were like founders, and they way overanalyzed it. And then the work product actually wasn't that good. The few I've done on the fly, like I'll do it with you when we go in the hall. Don't think too hard about it. I'll just say, teach me something.
Yeah.
And the organic is a million times better. Like you've done this on your channel a little bit, where you'll walk up to somebody and ask them a question.
Yeah.
Like, those bits are amazing. So yeah, constant learning, I think, is an attribute that all successful founders have.
Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about your pod. Like, what are you trying to do with that? And then we'll, I know we're getting a little bit long here, and then we'll wrap it up and talk more after the show. But what's the goal with the podcast?
Yeah, podcast is the goal is to be a resource for startup founders or people that want to start a company to get an inside view at the roller coaster that is required in the pursuit of building a great company. So I interview predominantly founders who have had exits, because I want to hear the story you got to hear today, right? I want to hear, how did you start it? Did you raise money? Like, what sucked? What was great? What worked? What didn't work, right? And then ultimately, how did you exit the company? And I believe that the podcast, if we just don't screw it up, can be one of the best resources for aspiring young entrepreneurs who are looking to start a company.
How would you screw it up if to your point?
Stop doing it.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's it. I think if we are just consistent and we stick to the plan and we keep producing content like you've been doing for seems like ages now, then we'll be okay.
Yeah, and I've been really, I mean, it's always so funny, right? Because I'll sit down with people and talk to them, like, and they're like, "You're so consistent," and I'm like, in my mind, I'm not at all consistent. Like in my mind, I'm the most inconsistent human being on the planet, right? But I think everybody's like, I'm really hard on myself, and I think that's what makes me it's one of my flaws, and it's also one of the things that it makes me great, because I to me, like what I've done on social media is nothing, like at all. Like if I wake up in the morning and I'm honest with myself, like just me, I'm like, I haven't done anything. I've like basically just produced my first piece of content yesterday. It was trash. It was garbage. Nobody's gonna watch it, you know.
I love that.
And it's just the way I am. I in my brain, I'm like, we got to go from like putting out like 1 reel a day to like 10 a day.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it doesn't count. Like not like it literally in my brain, like it's like 9 doesn't count. Like we lose. Like it only counts at 10. Like it's just like an all or nothing mentality, you know. Where like I'm like, we can't. So we're working on hiring more people and you know, turning it into more of a production. Which I think you have to do, right? If you want to compete, I think in 2023, like you have to put out a lot of content, I think, right? And you've got to put out just a ton of value, you know, especially like podcasting, I think, like in particular, I think any type of content, but there's like these different categories of content. And I think like podcasting, you know, like you've really got to show the world, I think, that you're capable of interviewing like 500 people. Right, or like 1,000 people. Yeah. Like when you look at like the Joe Rogans who are interviewing like their 2,000th guest.
Yeah.
Like just think about that like just for a minute, right? Like if you interviewed one person a day every day for 365 days straight, like what's 2,000 divided by 365? That means you did a podcast
like 7 years every day.
Every day of your life without missing a day.
Yeah.
And Joe Rogan's podcasts aren't short. I don't know if you've noticed, but like we're talking like 4-hour-long podcasts a lot of times. You're not filming 2 in a day.
For sure.
It's 1 in a day, right?
Yeah.
So like that level of, so people are like, how did he get as big as he did? It's like, well, I'll tell you how, right? 1 a day, every day, don't miss a day.
Forever.
For 8 years, right? Like pretty simple, right?
Yeah.
Lewis House, same concept, right? I think that he's on episode like 1400, right? So again, same concept, you know, and I talked to Lewis, and he actually said that, right? Like I was like, hey, like what is one piece of, if you could give one piece of advice? I kind of caught him on the fly, similar to like what you're talking about a minute ago. And he's like, just
I think I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah, he's like he's like, I've filmed 3 podcasts a week for a decade. He's like, that's my advice. 3 a week for a decade. Don't miss a week. You know, he's like, it's pretty simple, right? And so I think anybody can do that, but it's way harder to live out.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
For a
totally
multitude of reasons, right? Like, 'cause it's not just us sitting here. I got to get you here. And then we have to have a conversation. And then it has to get, like, there's a lot that goes into it, right? Where I think people miss even the beginning. I think people think about, like, here and then after here, but they miss, like, the beginning part too, right? Which is where, who am I going to have on? And then I got to reach out to them. And we have to have a whole team of people who are reaching out to people and emailing people and like, getting them on the show and scheduling them, and then scheduling them around like me building all of my other companies and making sure that like I have time to, you know, do everything. And so
yeah, it's insane. And then it's like, once you have the content, what do you do with it? That's a whole other discussion, right? And
whole
like
other thing, yeah.
The way that so many of these AI tools are automating the distribution of the content and the production of the content, like that means that there's going to be more content to compete with and more and more. And by the way, I think you would say the same thing. Like, I encourage everybody who's starting a company, wants to do a company, or just like living and breathing organism, just like do a podcast. Like I think everybody should do it. And it's becoming easier to do as well, right?
A million percent. I just think that the first, like, people have to know that the first 100 aren't going to get any views.
Yeah.
And, like, you have to be okay with that, right?
Yeah.
Like, you have to go into it, I think. And especially if you're, like, you don't have a massive network yet, or, like, you haven't really built anything really big, and you don't, you know, like, you just have to be okay with that, right? Because, like, I feel like I've done some cool stuff in my life, and we still aren't getting, we're not going, it's not like we're going viral on every episode. Now, once we repurpose the content everywhere, we get a good amount of views, right? But, like, not just on one particular platform, you know? So it's an interesting thing. It's a very interesting thing. Well, dude, I appreciate you being on, man. I appreciate you taking the time, and we'll have to do a follow-up pod in a couple of years, talk about where you're at. I'm sure you'll be building another company or something eventually. I would imagine.
I think so.
So where can people find you, Tyler, if they want to reach out to you? They want, you know, just to pick your brain, or they get advice, or come on your pod, or whatever.
So against popular pop culture belief, LinkedIn is where I'm mostly visible. It's where my audience is. It's where I produce the most content. We do have a strategy to be more active on other mediums like TikTok and Instagram and YouTube. But yeah, you can follow the podcast, the Roller Coaster Podcast, on anywhere where you do podcasts. But if you want to engage directly with me or my content, LinkedIn is the best place.
Cool. And what's the name of that podcast channel? Do you have one now?
Yeah, it's called the Roller Coaster Podcast.
Okay, got it. So if they type that in, they should be able to find it.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Dude, I appreciate you being on, man. And I'll link everything down below as well.
Thanks, man.
So if you're still watching, I greatly appreciate you watching. Do me a favor, support the channel by dropping a comment, subscribing if you haven't already. And if you're listening, make sure you leave a 5-star review. I would greatly appreciate it. Tyler, appreciate you being on, brother.
Thanks, man.
We'll see you guys in the next one.